Good morning. Please rise as you are willing and able and join us in singing this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon. Welcome to all who are here for the first time or one of your first times, and welcome to all of our longtime members and friends. And today, a special welcome to some guests that we have that are here for the installation this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And I have a couple of announcements to share about our upcoming events. You are all invited to celebrate the installation today in our main sanctuary and online. We will be covenanting together, and we will receive messages of inspiration and renewal from leaders across the Unitarian Universalist Association. We are delighted to welcome Charles Dumond, co-moderator and senior governance officer of the UUA, and our preacher Rosemary Bray McNatt, who is the president of Star King. And I spy at least two other guests already in the room, Kim Mason from St. Louis and Kimberly Quinn Johnson from Long Island. We are so glad. And Monica Jacobson Tennyson as well. From Washington State, we are so glad you are here with us. You can join Boxcast, the live stream, at www.tinyurl.com/Allison installation, one word. And this is the opportunity to know how to spell your new senior minister's name. If you put two L's in Allison, you will not get there. And we're renting parking all afternoon, and there's going to be a big celebration and reception following the service. And I am just so giddy, so moved to be here with you all day and for this new beginning. Next weekend, on Saturday, we're hosting a spring concert at 3:30 p.m. And next Sunday, our auction is back. Zap the Gap will kick off, and it'll last through 3 Sundays. And on May 7th, we're going to host an auction party following this service. And you can read the weekly Front Steps e-news to get more details about these two events. After our service today, we invite all of you who are here to join us for a social hour in Fuller. You can check out our art wall with works by Larry Gross. Once again, welcome one and all. And now let's take a moment to greet one another. Use the chat option if you're online on Boxcast or YouTube, and use the comment sections on Facebook. Tom Disrud, our associate minister, will light our chalice this morning. And if you're joining from home, we invite you to light a candle or a chalice if you have one nearby. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
Words for our call to worship this day come from poet Joy Harjo. Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of the universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is that life is. Remember. Let us gather now on this Sabbath day in hope, in memory, and in love. Let us sing together, Do You Hear? Please remain standing for our responsive reading by Mark Bellatini entitled, In Heaven. Ah, it's true. When our ancestors spoke of heaven, they were speaking of this moment. When they went on about nirvana, they imagined a time like this. When they sang of paradise, it was this morning they imagined. A time when all the mysteries of life and death are blended in a community of praise, when the bones of ancient lovers are given flesh again in our own bodies, teachers of long ago speaking of love and truth once more in lives so ordinary they are extraordinary. Blessed is our breath, in and out, quiet. Blessed is our sitting, our fidgeting, our movement. Blessed is our heartbeat, echoing the pounding alleluias of the distant stars. Blessed is the silence that is presence, not absence. Let's sing together now our doxology, Spirit of Life.
Glory
Throughout this church year, we dedicate our monthly offerings to organizations led by youth and or committed to the development of youth leadership. For April, we dedicate our shared plate collection to YEJA, which stands for the Youth Environmental Justice Alliance. It is a project of OPAL and is an after-school leadership development and political analysis program with low-income youth and youth of color in the Portland metro area. If you would like to give to our offering today and you're watching online, look for the QR code or find the Donate Now button on Boxcast. If you're in person, you can scan the QR code in the yellow slip of paper in the chair holders around you. And if you would prefer to donate checks or cash, the baskets will be coming around shortly. Thank you for your generosity. It makes a difference. We make space each week in our service to name the concerns of our community life. We are a caring community, and pastoral support happens through our ministers and through our lay ministers. That care includes holding the prayers of the congregation, of your prayers throughout the week. If you are here in person, you can light a candle of intention in one of our galleries and write down that prayer intention. And online, you can send an intention or prayer to First Unitarian Portland, to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. Today, we have 2 milestones to share. The first is that the flowers today were donated by Sarana and Frank Weller-Fills and by my mother-in-law, Marilyn Snedden, in honor of our milestone, the installation today. And the second one, let me look at Roger. A memorial service will be held for longtime member Karen Broucher-Tobin next Saturday, April 22nd at 2 p.m. in the Elliott Chapel. Karen died on January 8th at the age of 68, and we are holding Roger and their daughter, Elle, in our prayers in this season of grief. I invite you to unite our hearts and spirits in reflective meditation and prayer. Spirit of life, Spirit of an abundant love, surround us and move in us and through us on this historic day in the life of our congregation. We are present this moment to a mighty cloud of witnesses, those who came before us, who planted our church and who tended its early roots and shoots. Thomas Lamb Elliott and the women of the Ladies' Sewing Circle among them. We are present to those yet to come, the individuals and families who are longing for a liberal religious community that meets them where they are and companions them on a journey of transformation and hope. And we are present to all of us who arrived in the now or the more recent past, the us who will covenant today to give our lives over to one another and to our faith, to make meaning, to make a difference, and to the joys and sorrows, the challenges, the learning, the leaning into and leading towards a future worthy of the allegiance of our hearts and minds and spirits. May this season of planting anew, of renewal, of rising to life, allow us to reimagine, reshape, recovenant, and to reap the fruits of faith, hope, and love. All these things, and so many others, are our prayers and our longings for this springtime in our community. Amen. And blessed be one and all. And now I invite you into a moment of silence together. and let us sing, "Blessed be the ties that bind." Our first reading today is by Thomas Lamb Eliot, first minister of this church from 1867 to 1893. He was the leader of the Unitarian movement in the Northwest. In Portland, he was founder of the Boys and Girls Aid Society, superintendent of Portland Public Schools, worked to establish the Portland Free Kindergarten in 1884. He was an organizer of the Portland Art Museum, a founder of Multnomah County Library. He founded what would be the Oregon Humane Society. He worked for women's suffrage, mental health reform, and prison reform. And yet we dare to stand in his pulpit. Here are his words from 1882. What do we mean to express when we gather here one day in 7, when we order this place vastly differently from any other, when the service is distinguished from first to last, so that no one could mistake it for any other meeting together of humankind? The answer to this question should be like what one would say if asked, why do you go where you taste the salt breeze? Why, at evening, do you climb a hillside to see the sunlight on Mount Hood? Why do you care to know that this earth is not a stagnant, self-centered thing, as the nations once believed, and rejoice rather to know that it rolls in restless obedience, a creature moving through immensity, a sparkle of dust in the midst of the universe? People are not made to grovel, but to soar. We gather here to remember that. We take one solemn hour, one blessed day to open our minds. And our second reading is from poet Billy Collins, Passengers. At the gate I sit in a row of blue seats with the possible company of my death. This sprawling miscellany of people, carry-on bags and paperbacks that could be gathered in a flash into a band of pilgrims on the last open road. Not that I think if our plane crumpled into a mountain, we would all ascend together, holding hands like a ring of skydivers into a sudden gasp of brightness, or that there would be some common place for us to reunite, to jubilize the moment, some spaceless, pillarless Greece where we could, at the count of 3, toss our ashes into the sunny air. It's just that the way that man has his briefcase so carefully arranged, the way that girl is cooling her tea, and the flow of the comb that woman passes through her daughter's hair. And when you consider the altitude, the secret parts of the engines, and all the hard water and deep canyons below, well, I just think it would be good if one of us maybe stood up and said a few words, or so as not to involve the police, at least quietly wrote something down.
No time to tarry. Earlier in the service, Reverend Allison did share those words of Thomas Lamb Eliot, the first minister of this congregation, as he asked the question of why is it that we go to church? Eliot first references the ocean's salt breeze or seeing the sunlight on Mount Hood, and finally ponders, why do you care to know that this earth is not a stagnant, self-centered thing, as the nations once believed, and rejoice rather to know that it rolls in restless obedience, a creature moving through immensity, a sparkle of dust in the midst of the universe? Finally, he comes to the conclusion that people are not made to grovel, but to soar. We gather here to remember that. We take one solemn hour, one blessed day to open our minds. I expect today we might have some of the same answers when it comes to why we gather here, and I expect some of what we would say might be different as well. But that part about making space to open our minds, that part about gathering together, that part about soaring, that a lot of what he had to say still resonates, at least it does for me. With Reverend Allison's installation this afternoon, I find myself going back to the history of this congregation and what that might be, and what might be called this congregation's story, or perhaps even its calling. The story begins back in the 1850s when Portland was a young frontier town with a population of just 5,000. Back when Unitarians often called themselves liberal Christians, and they were often part of other congregations. They didn't quite have enough people, they thought, to form their own church. It was that belief about Jesus that set them apart from others, that for them, Jesus was a teacher, but not necessarily a divine teacher. In their world, divinity was possible in all of us. They wanted to emulate that modeling they saw in their teacher, Jesus. Mary E. Fraser and Sarah J. Burridge met in Portland in 1863 while working on the Sanitary Commission that worked to support soldiers and their families in the years of the Civil War and after. They were both Unitarians from Massachusetts, and their faith had come to be very, very important to them. They both longed to have a congregation here in this city, but it seemed there just weren't quite enough people. But that changed when the minister of the Congregational Church preached a series of sermons criticizing their beliefs, and that group of people, women mostly, decided that they had had enough. They discerned a call for a church of their own, and they did not waste any time with that. They started right away raising money, and the best way to do that, well, that was by sewing, whether it was making clothes for people or repairing clothes that had been had more life in them, and that gave them their name, the Ladies' Sewing Society. And it was not long before they were well on their way to achieving their goal of having their own church. They first asked the minister of the San Francisco congregation to buy them a communion service for their congregation. Next was the money for land and a building. They chose 2 lots on what was then a ways from the center of Portland's downtown, close to what is now Pioneer Square today. And they soon had constructed a building on one of those lots. And soon thereafter, it was they had found the money to bring their first minister here to Portland. Now, their first 2 ministers from back east, all ministers in those days came from back east. Their first 2 ministers from back east turned them down. It was their next choice, their third choice, Thomas Lamb Eliot, who said yes. Now, back in 1866, coming here from the east usually meant the journey was a long one, a long voyage that included passage across the Isthmus of Panama. It would be late on Christmas Eve in 1867 when Eliot, his wife, and their young son arrived here in Portland. Allison, I know your own journey west had its share of surprises and challenges, and yet I expect it was probably easier than that journey. Our spiritual theme this month is calling, and I want to reflect this morning on that sense of call that I believe also happens with institutions, and in particular with congregations. Why is it that a people come together, and what is it that sets any particular organization, any congregation apart? Now, certainly with the beginnings of this church, there were some patterns that have been long established through time. A long commitment for the church to be connected to the life of the city and the larger community. From the very beginning, Eliot and his congregation were very much involved in the city, as all those organizations that Allison listed off earlier reflect. In those early days, it was the Sanitary Commission. And yes, when Eliot saw a horse get beaten in a carriage that he was riding in, that spurred him to found what would become the Humane Society. Now, the Humane Society and so many of those other organizations are still around. But what does that legacy mean over time, and how is it that views and perspectives change with time? Part of the responsibility that comes with telling our story is trying to see that story through a wider and wider lens. In the case of that origin story, it's easy to leave out the part about the native people who were here in the first place before those white settlers arrived here from back east. Indeed, it is acknowledging the fact that those settlers, most of all Eliot, brought with them a belief in a social hierarchy that in fact had themselves, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, at the top of that order, that anyone who was not a white landholding male was somehow much lower in that pecking order. How what we now call justice work was most likely for them called charity, that with that there was a definite sense of those with more giving to those with less, and within all of that, a great, great abundance of privilege. And how beliefs do change and evolve. This afternoon, the installation service for Reverend Allison will include a land acknowledgement naming that the people who were here first had that land taken and that they have never been made whole. I expect that land acknowledgement may have seemed kind of strange for the founders of this congregation all those years ago. And who knows what else might seem strange. This week I found myself reading once again the history of the church and read an anecdote about Thomas Lamb Eliot inviting a female minister in this pulpit, but he needed to keep it secret even from the women who were among those founders, because even for them it would have likely been just too controversial. One of the causes of Eliot and his parishioners that they championed was women's suffrage. Eliot preached that women should be able to vote, but that they should be able to enter whatever professions they chose. In 1874, Eliot invited the Reverend Augusta Chapin, the second female minister ordained by the Universalist Church in America, to preach here at First Unitarian. But he didn't tell his parishioners or the press she was conducting the service. He was so concerned that if they knew, they would stay away. He later described the service as one of great truth and power. And after the service, Mary Fraser, one of the women who founded the church, validated the decision. But she also said, "Well, I am completely converted, but if you had asked me before, I should have been entirely opposed." Welcome into that tradition of women preaching, also Reverend Allison. Part of the story of that group, any gathering of people, is how it tells its story and how that story moves through time, how the norms and how the people change. Imagining how those early founders would have handled a woman preaching, or a gay man preaching, or a person of color preaching, or someone who does not identify on the gender binary preaching. How would they see their church in this day? Would they even recognize their church in this day? What are those threads of continuity? And what are those things that call us back to see things, to look at things in some new light? In our lives, we are each the product of our own stories. We are each the story of our own power and privilege, and also the oppressions we've known. We have each learned to live in the world and move through the world in our particular way, with our own particular stories of our own particular hurts and wounds, and our places of pride and of healing. Perhaps one of the roles of the church is helping us to see ourselves or to recognize how we haven't been seen in all of that storytelling. In the church, we hopefully come to see our own humanity as fully as we can, and the humanity of others as well. We come to recognize all of the possibility and our limitations too. What holds it all together, I think, is a covenant, the promises we make to be together in community. The most basic definition of covenant is to come together. To come together, it brings us into covenant with those who have gone before us, and it brings us into covenant with those who are here now. And perhaps also, most of all, it asks us to be in relationship with those who will come after us. That too is part of our charge, part of our story. The covenant is a living thing, something that changes and grows and evolves, something that's constantly being renewed. So what does that mean for us at this particular moment in history? The church is now, of course, at another kind of crossroads once again, a new ministry in formation, and it happens at a particular time in history. I'm aware these days how every Sunday we have people coming here for the first time or coming back for the first time after these COVID years. I'm also aware of all the losses we've known, literal losses in lives in these times, and losses of patterns, of habits, of routines, of a sense of safety of what we can and can't do. How the place where we were several years ago will not return. What is the calling of this congregation at this point in time and in history? Our Board of Trustees reflected on the question of calling at their meeting earlier this month, including asking them what questions should we be asking of ourselves. Questions like, so who is our neighbor? How is it we should be in relationship with our city? What is our mission today? One person asked the intriguing question of, what would it mean if the church simply ceased to exist? What difference would that make in our lives and in the lives around us? Those are good, big, juicy questions. One of the roles of the church, I think, is to help us see our lives and how they are connected with something larger, and see our lives in those ever-widening circles. We understand how our own struggles are not just our own struggles, but part of what it means to live in this world. It's in the church that we find a kind of container for our own experiences and see how our lives are so much with those around us. In the speaking of the joys and concerns that each Sunday, we get a glimpse of what our lives have been or may be. Whether we've had a joy or sorrow that day, we are reminded that inevitably we will have our share of joys and sorrows. It helps to remind us that we are part of that larger continuity. And we're in times when it's easy to feel as if we could so much lose our way. There is so much that is uncertain. There is so much that seems most in peril, most of all, the very life we know on this good green earth. So much that would have us see the other has not in relationship with us, but has simply that, the other, to be feared and wary of. Yes, there is much in these days that would have us losing our way. The author Anne Lamott recalls a story that was told to her by her minister. This is from her book, Traveling Mercies. Her words: "When she was about 7, her minister said, 'My best friend got lost one day. The little girl ran up and down the streets of the big town where they lived, but she couldn't find a single landmark. She was very frightened. Finally, a police officer stopped to help her. He put her in the passenger seat of his car, and they drove until she finally saw her church. She pointed it out to the officer, and then she told him firmly, 'I can get out now. This is my church, and I can always find my way home from here.'" And that, Lamott concludes, is why I have stayed with the church all my life, because no matter how bad I am feeling, how lost or lonely or frightened, when I see the faces of the people at my church and hear their tawny voices, I can always, always find my way home. As a community, as people and ministers together, we act as a kind of compass for each other at our best. We're here together to see that we're headed in the right direction and a place where we can do whatever course corrections are needed. Ministers and congregations grow and prosper and struggle together. They are greater together than they would be separately, I believe. At its best, the relationship is a kind of mutual flourishing. They learn together, hopefully grow together. They can learn to walk their talk together. They can frustrate each other in all kinds of ways. And sometimes there is hurt and brokenness too. But in the end, hopefully most of all, there is possibility and healing. That all of it in the end is grounded in relationship. That in the end it is grounded in love. And like any relationship, it's important to be intentional. That's probably why we're having an installation ceremony later today. It's important to be clear about the promises we're making and how we take them very seriously. Words again of Eliot. "Why do you go where you taste the salt breeze? Why at evening time do you climb a hillside to see sunlight on Mount Hood? Why do you care to know that this earth is not a stagnant, self-centered thing as the nations once believed, and rejoice rather to know that it rolls in restless obedience, a creature moving through immensity, a sparkle of dust in the midst of the universe? People are not made to grovel, but to soar. We gather here to remember that. We take this one solemn hour, one blessed day, to open our minds. On this day of new beginnings, may all of us together here find a space to dream together, sometimes to struggle together, but most fundamentally to be together. Sometimes we know the world is anything but easy. Maybe that's why we need the church right now and through all these years. We need one another right now. May love guide us in all that we do from that place, and in that place may we know joy, and most of all, may we together know possibility. Will you pray with me now? Great Spirit, hear our prayers this day. We give thanks for this church and its long history. We give thanks for all those who have gone before us, ministers and congregants, those remembered, those forgotten. Hold us as we enter a new chapter. Help us when we falter. Remind us that through it all we are together, and that when we are together, anything is possible. Be with us, Spirit, on this day. and in all our days. Amen. Let us sing together now, friends. Hail the glorious Golden City. Whether this is your first day in this community, whether you've been here for many, many years, know that your story is part of this much larger story. This is the day we've been given. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace. Practice love. Amen.